In last week's video, my daughter and I took Amtrak's Southwest Chief from Chicago to Newton, Kansas, then took a thruway bus down Interstate 35 through Wichita in the wee hours of the morning before awakening in Oklahoma City. Before today's train, the Heartland Flyer to Fort Worth, Texas, we desperately need a quality cup of iced coffee to assist my operational capacity on roughly 4 total hours of well-interrupted sleep. We tried. I don't have patience for stores not being open during their posted hours. We're going back to the other coffee place. That'll do. I might have slept slightly more on the bus. The bus was comfortable. The headrests weren't anything special when you look at them, but they fit my head perfectly, and without a neck pillow, I actually managed to get some sleep. It was kind of sad though. An older lady had her suitcase, and she was bound for the Greyhound that departed just before us. She pulled up and she was walking over to the bus as the Greyhound was pulling out, and then she comes up to our driver and asks about it, and he's like, "Oh, sorry, I'm going south." So we are on the last leg toward Fort Worth. Oh yeah, that looks pretty good. Next we are taking the Heartland Flyer. This is an Amtrak route that was initiated in the 1990s. About 4 hours for a couple hundred miles from Oklahoma City to Fort Worth. It's got a surprising amount of geographic diversity. It's the exact same consist as our Borealis from the other day. 2 Superliner coaches, 1 Superliner snack coach, and 2 P-42 locomotives. Hopefully in better working order than the ones we had coming out of St. Paul. Here's a OKC streetcar station with a thing and a shelter and a ticket machine. We'd ride that, but it's not frequent enough. It would still get us to the train, but a little too tight for my timing preferences. The Heartland Flyer is an interstate train operated by Amtrak, but falling under state government sponsorship to fund its operating costs. The route serves to bridge a gap in Amtrak's national rail network that has existed since the cancellation of the Lone Star train in 1979, which ran from Chicago to Houston. Presently, not all of that passenger rail gap is filled in between Newton, Kansas and Oklahoma City. The Heartland Flyer only operates daily from Oklahoma City south to Fort Worth, Texas once per day in the morning, with a return trip northbound in the evening. Only 25 people getting on here today. On that frequency, it's effectively like a commuter route between Oklahoma City and Fort Worth in Amtrak's system, though over much longer distance of 206 miles and serving population centers along the former Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad, now BNSF freight territory, over roughly 4 hours travel time. Glorious. Created in the late 90s as an effort to restore passenger rail service to Oklahoma and North Texas, a corridor that had seen traffic increases throughout the decades due to the North American Free Trade Agreement's increased use of Interstate 35 and other routes as one of the so-called NAFTA corridors for North American trade. The once-a-day train is tasked with building ridership based on traffic concerns like that, by the ability to multiply public transit connections for folks living around the route. It was another case where the intended growth from just having any train, even one that only runs once a day, should be able to single-handedly grow rail ridership despite its lack of frequency. Well, though ridership has recovered in this decade toward the median ridership of the last decade,
The once-a-day train still only averaged 88 passengers per train per day, according to a search of Amtrak's ridership data via Google. See the link below in the description. That level has never been substantial enough to lead state officials in either Oklahoma or Texas to call for increasing their state budgets to accommodate operation of daily trains. Well, it's sometimes called for, but it never passes. Thus, if folks need to travel to Oklahoma City from DFW prior to the evening rush hour, the train isn't an option.
Cafe Car is open and serving. The Cafe Car offers items like mimosas, Bloody Marys, beer, wine, mixed cocktails, Jimmy Dean's, sausage, biscuits, hot dogs, hamburgers, and much more. So if you would like to have the cafe, what you must do is stand up from your seat, go out to the aisles, and you have a 50-50 chance of going the right way. Below your stand. The cafe is in the middle of the train on the lower level. Thank you for choosing Amtrak as your mode of transportation.
Voice.
Likewise can be said about Oklahoma Cityans who need to get south in the afternoon or evening. For these riders, the only other option besides driving oneself is a private coach bus, such as Greyhound or Tornado Bus. The two I found most prominently in searches. And those services offer more daily frequency at a similar but generally higher price than Amtrak. It's these aspects, as well as increasing operational costs in many forms, that have contributed to the train's struggle to be included in state government budgets over the years. A week or so after I took this trip, I learned that this year of 2025 is one of those years. Texas's state legislature has not written the expense of operating the Heartland Flyer into its latest drafted budget proposal, setting off alarms among passenger rail advocates in cities along the route. Fort Worth has, of course, come out in support of restoring Amtrak's funding to the budget, their city benefiting in jobs and taxes from the line, most prominently as the endpoint and most popular destination on the line southbound. There's still some political process left to go at the time of editing, and the chance the Flyer will continue on past June 2025, when the projected funding cuts would require Amtrak to cease operating the service, is certainly a possibility this year, as I've heard it has been in years past. The current political trend to minimize budget levels and relocate funds as a result of the last national election cycle will, of course, dredge up a lot of opinions on this and any random government topic pulled from the internet, so I think it's important to focus on a few practical concerns regarding dropping the service. The Flyer is, as you can see by the plentiful seats in the trip, not making its money back and ought to be held to better performing standards, right? Well, every penny counts for taxpayer dollars, whether it's a penny or a million or billion of them. An underperforming train shouldn't burden the state it's supposed to serve. The ongoing battle on this, like most state-sponsored Amtrak routes, is whether operating costs versus profitability are the goal of the train service, and if the train is being given adequate funds to achieve meeting either goal. Even in 1999, when it began operations, one train per day in each direction is not enough to change a lot of commuting habits. To budget-minded elected officials, it seems like a tacked-on option for transit that is redundant given the option of driving, which is by far the norm in these states and America at large. Convenience wins over all other considerations. But considering only the revenues returned directly from the train itself doesn't paint the whole picture about the Flyer's economic impact. Folks who spend their tax dollars around the cities to which they travel have an incremental contribution to these cities' tax bases. Most riders on the Flyer are taking it for the long haul and contribute to the cities at the endpoints of the line that already have substantial tourist tax coffers from hotel and sales taxes that would disperse like grains of sand into the wind if train service were halted. But these removed tax dollars are more debatable when correlating the effects of lost train ridership. Do folks without a train drive instead? And does that affect their spending habits once at their destinations? One could argue that if the effect of these riders being lost from the train is so blendedly subtle, it's just proof that the train's impact isn't there at all, especially considering that vehicle ownership is plentiful, modern, laced with modern conveniences, and not going to stop anytime soon. That's also likely due to the train running only once per day in each direction. The typical conclusion I draw in my travels. Neither I nor the people who live and work to contribute to the tax base of these states has a lot to gain from a travel option that is too inconvenient to flexibly utilize. Where does the blame fall for that? Wait, is it the state that only planned a minimal operational budget? Or is it the trains that are considered obsolete, given the domination of personal vehicle ownership being made the standard by which our appreciation of transit operations are set? I honestly don't believe the latter is the root cause of the Flyers' issues. Dallas-Fort Worth traffic ought to be enough to give folks pause to consider a different option when traveling. I don't personally consider enduring traffic like that I can experience in my daily working life to be a good trip away from home, especially when I have to pay for a rental car. If the entirety of the train's existence has been in isolation due to not being funded at more than one train per day, it's setting up ridership and thus revenue to be controllably low. And yes, one can't ignore that the train is competing against the infinite convenience of familiar travel that we have in personal vehicles we already own for the most part. To leave at any time, and of course the Bucky stops along the way, are things that most people really look forward to. Thus, some additional funding to create a train that features distraction-laden amenities such as fast, consistent Wi-Fi for what people want to salve themselves with during long periods of travel by any mode of conveyance is worth considering as an upgrade to the spotty cell phone service currently available on Amtrak as their standard. That one aspect alone might give a face to what increased operating costs to keep these almost 50-year-old superliners running the route might have to offer those that previously wrote off train travel as boring and not worth the inconvenience. Folks don't mind having almost 200 people in single-aisle airplanes with 28 inches of seat pitch if the price is right. They'll certainly buy Wi-Fi to forget how much extra they spent on airfare while they get a basic free snack on their quick jaunt. If Amtrak offered free, fast Wi-Fi, they might spend some extra time on the train. Not all of us appreciate train window views for hours on end, even if the seat pitch and coach is more than first class on an airplane. The alternative of intercity bus service is better than nothing, but not better than Amtrak, in comfort or total running time. There are also several cities along the route whose only public transit option is the Flyer, and they deserve the capability to move about as much as anyone at the endpoints. Those large cities are certainly showing off what rail frequency can offer in the form of TexRail and the Trinity County system in Fort Worth, Oklahoma streetcar and BRT routes for the transit user or transit tourist. But much like they're indirectly included on the service neighbor Dallas, their transit funding is also in danger in this region of being withdrawn. Recent experiments with macro-sizing microtransit via multi-zone final mile connections in place of a number of local bus routes for commuters in Dallas is telling about budgetary idealism in the Texas state budget, as well as those running the metro systems. About that Texas state budget by the numbers. Trains.com reported on April 16th that rail transport total made up $47 million in the Texas state budget, whereas highways have requested over $35 billion. All of this with a total budget of over $337 billion of taxpayer money, which isn't only contributed by Texans but tourists as well. The state differentiates forms of transit in the budget, giving rail a lower proportion of tax dollars due to the plentiful highways and the cars sold and brought to Texas to be driven in and spend more money about. What rail is costing the tax base of Texas is a drop in the bucket compared to the highway's contribution overall to the budget and the overall size of the budget at large. Cutting the Amtrak system from the budget to save what fraction of the total rail transportation is really burdening Texas with is difficult to justify considering the distance between those budgetary category totals. It's millions versus billions here. Oklahoma has a similar budgetary separation of rail from its overall transportation funding, but it actually sets this Amtrak service into, wait for it, the tourism budget. So there's similar preference for greater cars and funds carrying people between Oklahoma and Texas in their state budgets. It's often touted that Amtrak is a coastal people service, not for middle America, which is often the way new routes seem to initially be set up by governments into the system, with later calls about why they're unsuccessful come from the same people who created them under such low frequencies in the first place. Many have pushed back against the Flyer from the beginning, over 25 years ago. The adage that Texans only want the best roads to drive gets thrown around a lot, but better frequencies for all forms of transit inspire more ridership. Induced demand has happened throughout the country, and many of the cities on this route are college towns and could always use some extra game day capacity. There could be more ridership and thus more tax dollars contributed to these states beyond the operating expenses kicked to Amtrak. That was initially going to be where the rationale regarding the Flyer hung its proverbial hat. But on the day prior to editing this video, Texas rail advocates posted an article stating the state of Kansas, the last remaining gap on the line to restore the route of Amtrak's full pre-1979 service between intercontinental rail routes, had passed a state Senate bill to grant its DOT $5 million to support passenger rail initiatives, including the Heartland Flyer's extension to Newton, where I had come from earlier in the day on this video. That $5 million is more than the additional costs for capital expenditures called for in the new Texas state budget this year. And coming from a state like Kansas with lower population and cities with no current rail service on the Flyer's line to be restored. That's a move that ups the ante for Texas to be on the hook, holding the axe over the Flyer's head at this time. I really think the backlash of cutting such a small item from Texas's overall spending and disconnecting Oklahoma from the national rail network is, at the very least, not the best move for something that should be viewed as a public utility. Like it is in the upper Midwest and most of America that isn't called California or served by Amfleets off the Northeast Corridor, the act of isolating Amtrak as a novelty travel option is unnecessary subjugation of what should be considered an essential addition to our set of travel options. Capacity is always a concern, especially when highway projects keep coming up, and giving folks an alternative to I-35 in the train opens up the capability to complete upgrades and reduce the ire of motorists if they've got an alternate way to get around the construction in the form of this train. If politicians want to keep business flowing freely through their states, the incremental additions of Amtrak travelers to the tax bases of their origins and destinations ought to be considered. At the least, I don't think Amtrak in Texas has stifled their budget so greatly as to require being totally eliminated from the budget. Though I doubt rail travel is the hill any politician would die on. Supporting what ultimately should be considered an apolitical public service by way of transportation that can make an adequate amount of money against its operating costs via quality of service. At least versus other routes like the Borealis where I'm from, this route is short enough to not have air travel as a primary competitor. Due to that, Amtrak in the States would do well to make the onboard passenger experience entertaining and useful. Rather than promise a pony for everyone who rides the train, I'll leave that to the residents to decide if they want. I don't want to be that rail-hopping weirdo who tried to make a video to convince taxpayers to contribute to Wi-Fi systems for 45-year-old rail cars. That's another issue I've touched on before, rolling stock. Amtrak would just as gladly withdraw this Superliner train set from the route until the Horizon car substitutions of Superliners on the Borealis and Hiawatha trains is over, and that's not even considering the national pool of coach cars needed. You know, the slightly more frequent state-sponsored routes up north, that's where Amtrak's problems lie right now, and that sort of state-by-state competitive nature doesn't help Amtrak's position in this, neither in their meeting rooms out east nor their counterparts' rail service lobbying offices in our destination state. Amtrak looks like a ridiculous way of travel to a lot of Americans, but I understand from doing some searching that there are plenty of devoted fans of this train that return to it trip after trip over the years. I get where they're coming from, and in many ways I could never predict why they take a train like this. But public transit is so infrequent in Middle America such that it drives people to stay in their cars and during traffic if the trade-off is convenient timing and amenities in their cars and a place to put a sticker telling hundreds a day what you're all about. It's not a matter of people caring about each other. People down south, out west, and elsewhere across the country do that very well. I actually think passenger rail has plenty of would-be supporters everywhere who've never been shown how to use the systems or even know it was an option. Many misunderstand what it would take to travel without a car for some part of the trip, but we made this trip between southern cities work all right, despite the low frequencies and odd connection times. Anyone can do this, but more people would do it at a better pace and frequency of trains. At least with some newer trains and amenities, that seems like a likely argument. Throw away train service anywhere and that's a different trip to take, and it's harder to say how I'd take it at any time. Train travel pricing is pretty consistent and tends to be less than most might expect. It's the final miles that matter when people arrive in a place they don't live in every day. Give these people enough goodwill by way of frequent public transit like TexRail and TRE in Fort Worth, and communities open up to take in the tax dollars of each other. The Amtrak branding and that brand's very own issues might contribute or take away from a regional system on any given day, let alone during times of political shifts, but good service out here in the interior of North America could improve the system overall. If anything, the persistence of rail travel supporters ought to give the Flyer and other services a fighting shot at survival. Hopefully this diatribe was all for naught and this will just be another signpost along the way, and all the same, I do hope that the Texas legislature doesn't undo what they've built in the Heartland Flyer service. Rail travel is part of a blend of modes of transit, none of which should receive more ire than their due, and ought to be given the funding to serve their taxpayers successfully. Costs are rising everywhere, and I think that what we paid to finish our trip on the Flyer would have been a bargain at a slightly higher price than the base of $28 per person compared to Greyhound's $43 average, and flights being astronomical to go direct from these endpoints on the route. But add in more modes by which to travel and that creates pricing competition. Prices get lower and returns don't come in the form of ticket sales only, but by where else those train riders take their money saved from their train travel through their destinations to spend. What the Flyer needs from Texas isn't much. And hey, Kansas is interested in getting more riders to make a connection from Chicago or Kansas City to spend their money in Texas and elsewhere. After this trip was done, I concluded I need to get back into Dallas's microtransit to show you what that's like, given it's a big move toward personal vehicles being favored here, but this time being used as public transit. But for this trip, I was only bound for a Trinity Railway Express train to Victory Station after this train, near downtown Dallas, and then on to Dart's Green Line, and DCTA's A train to Louisville for the night. Or is it a train? This is what I do. Transit-oriented tourism. I own cars, but I prefer to vacation without the stress and added expenses I already incur driving and living in a metro area with public transit options similarly inconvenient as anywhere in the world compared to somewhere else in that world. If you'd like to come out with me and experience all of them, maybe laying out my support for such potentially nonsensical causes, give me a like and subscribe and maybe share with your friends. And I'm ready to keep sending off trip reports as I arrive wherever some sparsely structured and funded transit systems might exist. If only to see how life is for folks taking trips in every which way there is to go. Leave a comment below with whatever I got wrong. Maybe all of it, right? We've all got options and experiences, and it all helps the channel. Look forward to a train window view from a long-form video from this and future trips across, up, or down this country by whatever form of transit I end up in. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one.